do you think the enemy or the devil, as Christians, do you think the enemy is happy when the church is silent? Does the devil's agenda does his agenda proceed or grow if the church is silent? And I think it is a lie from the devil that the church is supposed to be silent on shaping people's worldviews, because as soon as the church steps out of that, it creates a vacuum for something else to fill in that, and the only thing that's left is for the state and other religions to fill that.
Welcome on back, faithful, to another episode of Tough Talks, where we get into fringe topics, but also some more pertinent topics. Recently, got to go down the rabbit hole on conspiracy theories related to the secret societies that pull the strings behind the veil. More actual fun talks coming up towards the end of this month. I'll be doing a Q&A with Gary Wayne, so be sure to check the Q&A video because I want your questions. We're going to try and tackle as many as possible. Tonight, I am joined by Josiah Martin. Josiah, please introduce yourself to my listeners and tell them a little about who you are and what you do.
It's an honor to be with you, Eric. I love what you're doing, and I am just a young man in upstate New York, and just very passionate about what God has called me to do. And there are many things where our Christian life intersect with the public square, and I find that very interesting to see how God has positioned us. I am in a few of those. I am a business owner. I have some retail locations in manufacturing handmade pretzels, and so that's my day-to-day. More than 9 to 5, actually. That's a very big commitment, but I also, of course, attend our local church and very involved in leading worship, tech, and things like that. But something that's very becoming more and more passionate about in my life is getting good people to care about what's going on around them. And I'm just faced with the reality that the world around me is changing, and people are not realizing how much of an impact it's going to have in my future. And so as I look at it from multiple angles, both from the gospel, but also just practically as a business owner, there are things that I have to deal with that, boy, my generation is going to be faced with a lot of things that the previous generation did not have to deal with. And when I look at the church who has the truth, who follows the truth, I'm like, guys, where are we at on this stuff? So I'm excited to get into these topics. I think it's going to be a very fruitful conversation. And I would encourage you, if you have preconceptions or very just shut on these, or just very closed on these topics, I would encourage you to just come with an open mind. I think it's going to be very beneficial conversation.
Well said. And the topic of discussion tonight, folks, is going to be on biblical citizenship and the question, why should Christians care about politics? There seems to be a pretty stark and clear divide through most churches that I've been a part of, where you have one side of the pulpit, as it were, that says, "Oh, we should not be involved whatsoever. We only one king is Jesus. No king on earth, only him." And a lot of them have more liberal leanings. Some of them go into the realm of anarcho-capitalism, which unfortunately is incompatible with Christianity. But then you have the other side that is way too involved in the political side of things, to the degree that they tend to suck up more news through the course of a day than they actually spend time communing with their creator or even taking in the scriptures just themselves. So we're trying to find that line. Where do we want to be positioned as Christians? And probably the first question that I want to hit you with tonight is, what is biblical citizenship?
Absolutely. Well, it's a great question, and I would start by adding that for a church that is not interested in talking about these topics and getting into what's going on in culture, we're just waiting downstream for the human heartache that is caused by these things going on. And I just believe that. So when we have prison ministry, a young adults ministry, all these things, but if we're not willing to get into these topics, we're just saying, hey, come to us when you've experienced these these things that we know about, but we're not willing to communicate with you. So I think it is very, very, it is incumbent upon us to discuss these things. So biblical citizenship. Well, first of all, citizenship is being a citizen means that you're a co-ruler. It's the opposite of being a subject. It means that you have a say in what's going on around you. And so all the more we have an obligation to speak the truth into these things. And so when we talk about citizenship, people can kind of get lost in the oh, we're citizens of heaven. Ephesians 2 is very clear about we're citizens of heaven and we are seated in heavenly places. And absolutely, I mean, we are citizens of heaven, but we have dual citizenship. We are both a body and a spirit. There's a spirit lives within us, and so when we talk about being citizens of heaven, that's accurate. But we also are citizens of this world. And I want to read from 2 Corinthians 5. I think it spells us out very clearly, and it says, "So we are always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we are not at home with the Lord. For we live by believing and not by seeing. Yes, we are fully confident, and we would rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord. So whether we are here in these bodies or away from this body, our goal is to please Him." And this is the critical part. "For we must all stand before Christ to be judged. We will each receive whatever we deserve for the good or the evil we have done in this earthly body." That's 2 Corinthians 5, verses 6 through 10. And so, absolutely, we are citizens of heaven, but we are also a citizen of the United States. You can't deny that. And so we have responsibilities that come with being a citizen, and that's important. Failure to do that is a lack of gratitude for what the men and women who have even died for this country, who have given us our freedom that we have today. And so I think even more than, I mean, that's paramount, but also as Christians, not voting and not being involved in what's going on around us is allowing a vote for a person who is anti-God. And so that is very prevalent. So all that to say, what does it mean to be a biblical citizenship? I think that I believe that the Bible clearly states that it is loving your neighbor as yourself. It is promoting justice, freedom, and liberty. And I wonder what country has those in its founding documents.
Yeah, I know. Also, what country has had the longest lasting constitution of any other country in
Yes,
existence?
we set a record every year.
Yeah, we seriously do. We really do. Well, it's wild. There are some nations where within a person's 80, like your average life expectancy is between 70 and 80 years. So we'll give them benefit of a doubt. You're going to make it to 80. There are countries where within a person's 80-year lifespan, they could see a constitutional change up to 5 times statistically. That's the course of their life. And these are things that are the very fundamentals of your rights as a citizen of said country. Like maybe today you can post on Twitter, maybe tomorrow it's a capital crime. Who knows?
Yeah, you might go to jail.
You did mention something there that is crazy pertinent, and it's about simply just getting out to vote. And actually it's our duty to go out and actually have a certain effect within our community through a number of different channels that are open to us. And I don't know how up you are on voting percentages. This is something that I found to be wild. Touch on the Hebrew culture first, and then jump into some stats here. But in the Hebrew, there is no word for rights. They teach responsibilities. And under our nation's law, yes, you have the right to vote, provided that you're 18 and that you're registered so that we know who you are. But it's more than that. You have a duty to vote. You have a duty to be politically active in a meaningful capacity. And that's not just on the presidential level. That's all the way on down to your local level, where elections are won and lost, sometimes by a matter of one vote or by no votes. And some of the stats from 1980s to up until just a few years ago, only 67.1% of Americans are actually registered to vote. Out of 360 million plus people in this nation, 67.1%. And the rest of them, for them not to be registered, they're virtually saying, I don't care what happens in America and I'm not going to be a part of it. Okay, but they'll still gripe online, or they'll gripe around the table at Thanksgiving to their friends and family about who's running the show. And since 1980, on the average voter turnout for the presidential election has been 54% of the registered voters. So,
Hmm.
we're getting into around half of that number. And that comes out to be about 36.2% of the whole population votes with any kind of regularity, specifically for our presidential race. And it only takes half of that to win the election. Now, going further with it, when it comes to actually voting in midterms, typically only 26% of Americans are even going out to vote. So 1 in 4 Americans is actually going out and casting their ballot. And many of them only ever in the presidential election. But it's so funny, like I already mentioned, people still have this gnawing inside of them to voice their opinion about what the political status of our country is and what's happening in the schools, but yet 33% of them aren't even getting out there to throw a vote. And then beyond that, if you're going presidential, we have what, 64% of people aren't even casting a ballot, period. It's
Well,
bananas.
and you're talking about just citizens in general, but when we look at even the evangelical vote and how that breaks down, it is
Mm,
more sobering because we look at those numbers, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know that about 50% of those who are registered to vote, it's right around 50 to 60% of those actually vote. And so it's not even the number that are registered, but it's how many of them actually go out to voice their, voice and be involved in that process.
yeah, and I'm a big fan of the logic behind, look, if you don't cast a vote, you don't get to complain about it. And that's sort of it's more of a dig, at least in the Christian circles that I run in, at those that I know who are libertarian or anarcho-capitalists, both of which I do maintain are incompatible with Christianity, period. Because the ones that I find that are very heavily leaning that way, they have not read their scriptures thoroughly enough to actually be able to justify their points that they're
Hmm.
trying to make. And a lot of them, they adopt that mindset of, oh, only king is Jesus, so I'm staying out of it. Like, okay, well, you're still a part of the society, and you're still going to pay taxes. You can talk about how much you don't want to pay taxes and how taxation is theft, but if Jesus didn't want us to pay the taxes, then when he was entering that city with his disciples at the checkpoint, and they were like, "Master, we need a coin to give these guys," and he said, "Oh, you know what? Go and get a fish. It'll be a coin in his mouth." He would have gone through all that. He just said, "Up yours, boys. We're heading in anyway."
Yes.
But he made the distinction there. He says, look, you're not residents of this world. You're residents of your heavenly Father's world. You are residents of what is going to be your, not just the domain that your resurrected body is going to be entitled to, but we know that all of creation is his. But he says, so not to give offense, let's go ahead and pay our taxes, whatever the world
Hmm.
demands of us. And he was pretty clear, at least in my estimation, of, hey, there are laws that you're expected to follow, and yes, you have people that are put in positions over top of you, and you gotta follow these laws unless they try and contradict or obliterate God's law. Then you got to make hard choices and stand on the actual principles that are etched onto the inside of your heart.
Yes. Yeah, you're mentioning Romans 13 there a little bit, and to be submissive to authorities, and that was brought up a lot during COVID about, oh, we just need to submit, and it's like, well, okay, you have to understand that they are there for our good, and so as soon as they cease being good, and according to the rest of the Bible, like the Bible wasn't written just that's not the only chapter and verse in the Bible, so you have to take it in its totality, and so when you look at that scripture, it's very abused because well, first of all, they're there for our good, but also that you're supposed to be submissive to the government authority. And in America, it's we the people. It's not we the Congress or we George Washington or we the whoever the dictator is at the time, but it's we the people. That's the whole idea that our founders read through the scriptures and understand that, wow, humans are not naturally good, and so we should have a check and balance on that power. And so when it becomes totalitarian, they have a way to vote those evil people out and replace them with people that have moral ethics.
Yeah, and it's so incumbent on people to actually take an active role in doing that, because otherwise you reach this critical mass place where we are right now, where there have been so many bad decisions being made and so many steps being taken towards that chaotic side of just evil that is masquerading as the law. And it didn't happen all at once. As the Bible describes with sin, it is a slow letting out, like a slow leak. And then before you know it, the boat is going to capsize. And that happens by people turning a blind eye to it or being indifferent. And to quote to quote the father in the very beginning of the movie Boondock Saints, he says, he's talking about Kitty Genovese, stabbed over 30 times, screaming for help out there in the streets. Nobody even so much as called the police. Her attacker left and then came back later to finish the job. All the while, no one helps her. And he says, "Look, I get it. We all fear evil men, but what we have to fear even more than evil men is the indifference of good men." And
Yes.
The indifference of good men keeps them from voting because they say, "Oh, well, it's a wasted vote anyway. Oh, I live in a blue state. Maybe I'm in a red county, but I'm in a blue state. Doesn't matter." No, it it most definitely matters.
Well, you mentioned duty earlier, and I wanted to just double click on that a little bit because it is one of my favorite words in the English language. It's right up there next to earn and beautiful. But duty is a lost word. It's a word that it speaks of an obligation. It's what you ought to do. It's something that it overrides your feeling. You have a duty and obligation to do what is right. And in a narcissistic society where they're asking the question, why should I do what's hard? Then you come face to face with these questions of why should I defend what is good? Why should I protect women? Why should I have children? Why should I even get married? It's hard. And I want everything here and now. And so when we come against this culture of just complacency in that, and we speak about duty, we think of these heroes who took the duty that they had all the way back in the Bible, but even through the wars that were fought to have the freedom that we have today, they had a duty and they understood that they had something to sacrifice for us to be here today and to benefit from their sacrifice. And that duty is now what we get to stand on the shoulders of. And so as Christians, we should vote to minimize evil and to maximize righteousness. And when we live from that place, I mean, that is a very simple thing to fill in a bubble. We're not asking you to storm Normandy Beach or to even run for an office. I mean, I think that's I think people do have that obligation, but the bare minimum of filling in a ballot is become controversial.
Oh my gosh, so much so. You touched something really great there that I also want to double click on, and that is the concept of without saying it, it's concept of limited government. You can only have limited government if you have a higher degree of internal government.
That's right.
The more degree of internal government that you have, the less external that you need. And if people out there who especially would lay claim to the name of little Christ, as Christian implies, for them to be acting in a way that makes them indiscernible from your average secularized heathen, then don't pretend for 1 second that you're fooling anybody when you say, "Oh, well, I don't want the government inside my pocket," because everything about your actions and your behavior screams that you do.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a few questions that I would just pose for people who are maybe on the fence about this. And the first one is, do you believe it is better to have atheists run our country or for Christians? And you have to face that reality, because if you think that it's better for atheists to run our country, then how is that going to affect your life? How does that affect your neighbor's life? And so I'd encourage you to think about that question. The second one is, does the Bible tell us how to treat other people, even non-believers? Does the Bible tell us how to treat other people? And the third question is, do you think the enemy, or the devil as Christians, do you think the enemy is happy when the church is silent? Does the devil's agenda, does his agenda proceed or grow if the church is silent? And I think it is a lie from the devil that the church is supposed to be silent on shaping people's worldviews, because as soon as the church steps out of that, it creates a vacuum for something else to fill in that. And the only thing that's left is for the state and other religions to fill that. So the enemy is absolutely, he wants the church to be silent. He wants us to believe this lie. And you can look in history when there was a very clear turn, a lot of money has been put into telling the church that it should only preach the gospel because it sounds like such a vital thing. Absolutely. The most important thing that you can do is give your life to Christ. And the second most important thing is to make sure you can do the first thing. So you should be able to live to do that.
Ooh. Love it.
Uh-oh.
Well said. Well said. Ponder those ones there, folks. No, you're absolutely correct there. 100% correct. And I had nothing else to add to that one there. So, I guess for those out there that still grapple with the idea that they should very much be vinegar and water when it comes to political topics, especially within the church, first of all, should Christians be involved in politics and like everything from voting even to possibly running themselves? And if so, why should they care at all about the politics beyond what we've already discussed?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think that, first of all, should we Christians be involved in politics? Yes, I believe they should. I believe the Bible actually demands that, because evil exists, and for evil to exist, truth has to be absent from that person. And in Psalms 97:10, it says, "You who love the Lord must hate evil." Just those few words: "You who love the Lord must hate evil." And I would go even to the extent that if you don't hate evil, then you don't love God, because God is juxtaposed to evil. He can only do good. And so if we claim to follow God and be, like you mentioned, little Christ, then we have to hate evil, and we have to strive to see that change. And so also in Jeremiah 29:7, excuse me, answering the question, should Christians be involved in politics? I'm reading here, it says, "And work for the peace and prosperity of the city where you were sent into exile. Pray to the Lord for its welfare will be determined by your welfare." Again, it says, "Pray to the Lord for it." And Jeremiah was talking about the city that you were sent into exile, right? I mean, so that's even more extreme. But pray to the Lord for its welfare will determine your welfare. Right? We are to care and work for the prosperity and the peace of the city that we are in. And caring means to care for the least of these. Jesus talked about to protect the vulnerable, to visit the fatherless and the widows, but also to look at how our structures, how our laws are formed to create a society that lives in peace, because our welfare is tied to that. And so again, evil only continues when good people don't speak up.
Great point there on the actual duty that we have, because you look at the story of Lot, Genesis 19. Now this guy is living in a very, very heathen city, given to all sorts of abominable practices, but yet he was one who sat in the gate. Now, for those who aren't familiar with what that means in historical view back in the Bible, to sit in the gate, be one who did that, you were one that was essentially part of the city council. You were one who had to sit there and settle disputes with people. Hey, this guy stole my oxen. Hey, did you steal his oxen? Oh, you did? Great. Well, you got to give him back, or we're gonna have to chop a hand off. Like, he was having to preside over cases. He was having to weigh in on decisions. He was having to handle people that were coming in and out of the city. What are you bringing in? Okay. What are you taking out? What's your business here? He was doing all these things. And if you even dissect the conversation between God and Abraham, where Abraham he's being real Jewish in trying to whittle God's number down from, well, say you find 50 people there, all the way on down to, what you find. It should have been done with a really good New York accent, as Chuck Missler said. He'd be like, hey, God, we'll find like 25 guys there. What do you think? 25 guys? Okay, we'll get them down to like 10 guys there, good people. Right, you won't kill the city. All right, what about one? Because I think he could have gotten God all the way down to one. And we know that was a fact, because the two angels that show up there to get Lot and his family out, they're like, look, dude, you've got to go, because we can't lay siege to this entire place until you're gone. But even though Lot was there, he was still being a good fiduciary of the actual tasks that God gave him. And that is to do your best to do like those inside Psalm 84. And that's wherever you go, make it a place of springs, make it a place of flourishing. Like the river, or like the valleys of Baca, it's described. They go from strength to strength, each one appearing before God in glory. Like, it is your duty to put your best effort in. And a lot of people I have seen, they get up in arms about government, period. And they're like, well, we shouldn't be under any government, no borders. There's no way that this government here could possibly be from God. Well, okay, that might be your thought. However, we go right to the book of Judges. Every single time Israel gets out of pocket, it says almost in every single instance, everyone did what was right in his own sight. The
Yep.
judge that was currently sitting there presiding over all the cases, once they died, Israel was allowed to be put into slavery and just tormented by those around them. And they were put under foreign governments. And that was a way of God saying, hey, this is the punishment for you living godlessly. And given the bevy of sins that we have allowed ourselves to indulge in here in the States, and also the things that we will champion, like watching New York City blaze forth in brilliant LED fashion atop the Empire State Building, pink lights to cheer on afterbirth abortions up to 6 hours after an infant has been given birth to, as though that's some sort of victory. It begs the question, do we live under a brass heaven for how many millions of babies that we have slaughtered? And is it possible that when we are under tyrannical governments, that is in fact God saying, yes, this is ordained by me because this is a punishment for you not taking up your duties seriously?
Well, I want to just create a little bit of a contrast, something that came to mind about being involved in politics. You mentioned Job, which, well, no, you mentioned Lot, and I think that's a great example. There's some really amazing, there's a really good story there about, or example about being involved, but not letting it consume you to the point where you then become so attached to the city that you are not willing to leave despite the destruction. And so there's some really good, you can really get into that. It's a really good example. But when you think about politics for itself, if you think that Christians should not be involved in the public square or politics, however you want to frame it, then you need to prove the need for government to not exist.
Oof.
See, because you're saying that they can't exist together. You're saying that if Christians should not be involved in politics, you're saying that if a senator becomes a Christian, he needs to resign from his place of influence and go sell insurance or go clean cars or something. He can't make decisions because all of a sudden he's a senator and or he's a Christian, and so now he can't do that. And so you have to prove that there's no need for government if Christians can't be involved. Now, like, Christians can't, there's other things that Christians can't be involved in because they shouldn't exist. Like evil, we shouldn't be involved in evil because evil shouldn't exist. But we have to have government. There is government there for a reason. I mean, Romans talks about that very clearly, Romans 13 and other chapters where Romans exist or government exists for a reason. God uses it they don't carry the sword in vain, as Paul talks about. And so that is a very important question that you have to think about in your head if you don't think that Christians should be involved in politics. And I think it's a very compelling argument.
So what would you say the ideal Christian who is involved politically but is also very intentional with regular study of the Word of God and involvement within the community, what does that ideal Christian look like? Where is sort of the balance for them? Things that they should speak to or stand up on or, be civilly disobedient towards? What does that ideal person look like?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's so simple. So I can actually speak from a little bit of experience where my dad is a county legislator. And so it's a great position where you get to have influence on what's happening in your local community and help make decisions and advocate for what your community needs.
That's
and
awesome.
So on a very local level, we instantly go to these very, these large, senators and federal positions. But on a local level, you have to remember that these decisions are made in a town building a few miles from your home. And they're deciding these laws that have moral implications. Everything down to the speed zone has a moral implication. We have speed limits because we don't want kids to get run over in school zones. Yep. It's like all of these things come back to just simple biblical truths and how we are to provide for and protect, like, first of all, like, we have police officers to prevent crime and to lock up criminals because we love people that they would otherwise be hurting. And so you can take any of these things and apply a biblical a framework around it, because the Bible speaks to everything. The Bible is more current than tomorrow's news. It's more current than anything that is going to come out in thousands of years. Just because we have airplanes and Twitter doesn't mean that the Bible is not relevant to what's happening in our lives. And so you take these biblical truths and you apply them to the decisions that we're making in every single situation. And you look at, there's examples of where, like, John the Baptist was confronted by soldiers who got baptized. And okay, so what do we do? What do we do now that we're Christians? And he said, well, treat each person justly. Don't take things that you shouldn't take, and so on. And Jesus even was faced with that question with the Roman centurion. And so I think that it's just a matter of applying these principles to every area. I've seen my dad do it where, well, first of all, politics, a lot of people go into it as a career. Obviously, that's not what he's doing. And so he's left his other duties, and he is committed a few years anyway to make a difference. And he has brought people together that would otherwise not be talking to each other. And so he's bringing the spirit of unity, of camaraderie, to solve these issues and to see people as humans. And that is so refreshing for people who are so used to a divisive culture, and to be able to just experience that. And for me, it's like, what an amazing opportunity to bring Jesus into somewhere where there is so much divisiveness, and have a calmness and really like a supernatural, like, superpower, really, to be able to get wisdom and understanding. And, here in New York, to confront evil. Like, our governor is trying to pass things where, like, for example, I'll speak to one where you would get a tax credit if you moved to New York State to get an abortion. And so as a county, they can say, hey, we are going to put up protocol, or we're going to put up procedures where, or we're going to campaign to prevent that as a county and work with other counties. So, like, there's things like that, but really it just comes down to carrying Jesus wherever you go. And it's a principle that you actually believe in. If you don't, I don't know how you can be a Christian, because you have to exist in the world. And here in my business, I apply those principles to my core values, the way I treat my employees, to the way I treat our customers, to our vendors. It influences everything that we do.
I'm sure you've heard the saying, don't be so earthly minded don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. You can definitely be a little too earthly minded as well, that you're no heavenly good. But the former there, a lot of people, it's the abstinence of it all that becomes such a crutch that they lean on. And you can't stand idly by watching evil till its way up to your front door, and then be surprised when your house essentially gets annexed into eminent domain by that evil. Yeah. And specifically with regards to the scripture that you mentioned, does the Bible tell us how to teach or how to treat each other? Absolutely. If you look at 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, what does it say? All scripture is breathed out by God, profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. Okay. And the percentages of Christians that actually read their Bible with any kind of regularity, by the grace of God, has increased a whole 2% from the last time I actually checked the numbers on it. It used to be 4% of Christians read their Bible with any kind of regularity, and that's like a minimum 4 to 5 days a week. It has now been increased to 6%. 6% of professing Christians read their Bible. I know we're climbing out of the pit that we've been reaching.
I guess that's something we should celebrate. It sounds paradoxical, but
it's I would love to see it be 96% with any kind of regularity, because that comes back to that internal government, making it so you don't need the external. And I love that your dad is doing that, because it's so healthy to get somebody into the room with somebody else of an opposing viewpoint and have a civil discourse about something. Even if you guys are completely opposite sides of the political aisle, if you're completely opposite sides of the spiritual aisle, it's so healthy to be able to do that, because then you can actually have real connection with somebody and you can see beyond your own preconceived notions. So many people out there, they have they feel so affronted by the thought of having to even stand in a elevator with somebody who might be on the other side of the political aisle. Then
Yeah.
for them it becomes such this insurmountable hill for them that they can't even accept that person as a human being. But if you know, like your dad's able to grapple with these ideas and get other counties involved and say, hey guys, this is what's going on, and just on its face these are bad things here, or hey, this is a good thing here, we can talk about it, we can become involved, it sort of chops those that would sit back and allow their addiction to outrage compel them to just spit all the insanity and venom out into the aether without actually doing anything, to actually stand up and then do something. Like I drive myself crazy about this one simple little thing that I see all the time inside the otherwise red county that I live in, and that's when I see people who have American flags on their cars or their trucks, primarily it's trucks, or they have a decal on the back of their window that's an American flag overlay, or it says 2A, Second Amendment. They have something that is very much pro-America. When I see those vehicles pull in to a parking space, but they've double parked, or in some cases quadruple parked, when they get out of the car and they look down at the tire that is 2 feet over the next space to their left, and then over the space in the front here, they look at it, and instead of getting back in their truck or their car and adjusting themselves and pulling into the spot, they go, somebody else's problem. That same person is going to pull up into the fire lane, park that car there at a mini mart, get out of their vehicle, go inside, I just got to grab a loaf of bread and a couple of steaks because I got friends coming over real fast, and leave their car sat in the fire lane, and then act affronted when somebody asks them, hey, would you please move that, because a fire can happen like that. Those same people with the American flags on the back of their windows who behave like that. If that's you out there and you're listening to this, don't pretend for 1 second you give a rat's ass about your fellow man here in America, because simple little decisions like that shift your entire frame of existence from order into chaos. Simple little crap like that cast such aspersions onto you and the flag that you're trying to represent. And if you're a Christian, God forbid you're doing such ludicrous nonsense, because that is you literally carrying the Lord's name in vain to the masses while you tweet from an iPhone and sip on a Starbucks.
Good line. Wow, we should just let that reminisce a little bit right there. I feel like that's the moment.
Percolated.
Yes. Well, wow, there's so many good things. I mean, you talk about, representing the Lord's name in vain. I mean, that's like, that in itself is one thing that we should always be thinking about, because everywhere we go, we are mirrors of, we're ambassadors of heaven and of Jesus. And so we carry that with us. And so people think of carrying the Lord's name in vain as something as simple as, or not as simple, but simply that it's not saying a bad word in oh my or something like that. And so, but it's actually, it means a lot more than that. It takes on your whole existence. To carry means to have, it's like a heavy thing, and you carry it with respect and honor, that everywhere you go, you represent what you carry. And I think of how Jesus talked about how we are salt and light of the world. We are a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden, right? Matthew 5. And he talks about, like, if it's lost its flavor, what do you do with it? You just throw it out in the street. It's no good. And when we think about how we are to influence culture and everything that we do around us, even if politics or that type of conversation isn't your dig, that you just maybe vote every year, that's fine. But whatever you do to be salt and light of the world means that you carry the Lord with you in everything that you do. And that includes preserving righteousness, because salt by nature kills the bacteria that it comes in contact with, but it has to come in contact with it. It can only preserve if it's saturated in that, and it goes to every place that evil exists. And likewise, Jesus used the example of light, and light changes darkness. Light brings hope to hopeless situations. And that's what we have the opportunity to do. And I think the world is craving for truth, because that is being so distorted in culture. And they're wondering, why is so many things being questioned around me? why are these things being called into question when we used to have an existence that had some order, that we didn't have all these wars going on and chaos? But when we bring salt and it preserves that righteousness, that is what God asks from us. And I think it is our duty and obligation to do that.
That's good. I love that you bring up the fact that, yes, we are called to be salt. And what's really super interesting is there are so many different characteristics to the use of salt that most people even think about. It's fun if you ever do a biblical study into the properties of salt and its uses, because salt can be used for seasoning, it can be used for preservation, it can be used in conjunction with healing, it can be used for even destruction if it has to be. There are so many different uses for salt, and we are called indeed to be salt of the world. It's also interesting, back in the biblical era, the salt that they had, it's not like the salt, the table salt that we have nowadays, where it doesn't ever lose its saltiness. Back then, their salt could be corrupted, could be completely diminished, and as you said, good for nothing, to be cast out. And like, if you haven't figured it out yet, folks, in this game of life, we're playing for keeps, right? There's literally no prize for second place. So as the Apostle Paul said, run the race in a manner such as ye win said race. So you bring up a great segue there, and that is our responsibilities, the things that we've rested on, and what we are now left with in the wake of resting on laurels and resting on integrity and on truth. Given the current state of not just our political climate, but just the current state of our what's the world, our
Society, culture.
so yeah, I guess the current state of our society as a whole, and we're talking everything from entertainment to schooling to the churches to politics to our business, our commerce and e-commerce, our medical institutions. What would you say has really led to the moral decline that we're finding so prevalent here in the States?
Well, there's many things. I think of, and I wanted to bring this up, and it goes well with this. In John 10:10, it's my favorite verse in the Bible. It says, "A thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. And my purpose," speaking as Jesus, "is to give them rich and satisfying life." And so when we think about this question, we have an enemy who will use anything to destroy God's image. And it's interesting, you think about what's going on in culture now. Why do you think there's this direct assault on life, on marriage, and the church? That trifecta right there, that they all point to God. It's so obvious. Life, our existence, points to a creator who breathed life into us. Marriage is the divine marriage of Christ in the church, Christ in the body, and then, of course, the church itself. And so I think that is, so we see this come together where we are all made in his image. And so we are going to be carrying that authority. So it's going to come, the enemy is going to come into try to evade that space and take on dominion in who we are. But he's also going to try to destroy that. He's going to destroy anything that has God's image. And God's will is for his kingdom to be on earth as it is in heaven. And we are to pray for that. We are to be witnesses of that kingdom and to put that faith into action. And so when we think about, okay, how do we coexist in this culture? How do we, how are we to manage our lives and go about our day-to-day lives in a culture that has changed so much? I think that it is incumbent upon us to take what we have learned and read in the scriptures and put it into action. Mm-hmm. In James 2, it talks about, actually, I'm just going to read it here. So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. James 2:7 and 17, excuse me. And so faith requires action. It is something, I'm thinking of this example of like someone's drowning, right? You gotta save them from the peril that they're in before you can talk to them about Jesus. And around us, we have so many people that that I see and come in contact with, there's so much hopelessness. And if the church is only speaking the gospel, which is obviously that is the most important thing, but we're saying, but we're not talking to them about these laws of nature that, like, hey, if you do this, this is the inevitable end. You know,
Mm.
if you take these steps, this is what's going to happen, and it's in the Bible, but we're not willing to speak on it because we're like weak or cowards or something. Uh, then we are failing as the church to bring truth into those areas and live it out in our own lives. And so that practical that truth right there, I think, is something that we can take what we know and put it into action.
Mm. Like, for those out there that feel like they have no place to speak about it, I know a lot of that comes from simply being unknowledgeable on a subject. It's like, for people out there that I have met who have talked about guns with this fear. They're afraid of guns, as though a gun
Mhm.
has its own mind, can just get up, walk on two legs, and shoot at will whatever it wants to. I found for those people, when they willfully educated themselves on what a firearm was, its many parts, what sort of calibers there were, how it's used, how it's been used in millions of defensive situations yearly since since the modern era, as it were. I'd say in like the last probably 20 or so years, where we've seen a much more high-tech boom inside the firearms industry. The more that they learned about said firearm, the less afraid of it they were. And it was through the education, and in much the same way we as Christians, we have got to be inside the word. And for people who are like, well, I don't see anywhere in the Bible that I can actually speak to these political issues, it's like, have you read the Gospels? Matthew 19 is all about no fault divorce. Matthew 25 is all about taxation. Matthew 20 is all about employer relationships. John 8 is all about civil court procedures. It's all right there. It's all right there in the scriptures. You just got to jump in there. I mean, thank God we're not under the 613 Levitical laws, because I don't want to be having to rip the heads off pigeons when I don't have enough money to go out and buy the cow that I've got to bring in for sacrifice. But it is all present in there, and you have to be immersed in it. And what I've found has been such a huge issue that has led to vast moral decline from every, and it's largely been in what has trickled down from the entertainment sector that I've noticed.
Hmm.
And that has been, as Noah Webster described it, the national misery that proceeds from despising the word of God. And like you said before, God makes it very clear, if you're not for me, you are against me. He tells us in the Bible also, that which is not done in faith is a sin. Okay. Hebrews, not Hebrews. Actually, I think it is Hebrews. The writer says, Lord, please forgive my, he describes the evil and unbelieving heart. And in Revelation, the first that are listed as those people that are going to be doomed to the fires and are going to be suffering damnation for their works here are the fearful and the inactive. It's like, God hates fear that has led you into inaction. Absolutely despises that. That's why we're told in 2 Timothy 1:7, he hasn't given us a spirit of fear, one of power, love, and a sound mind. But
Yeah.
you only reach that sort of comfortability and that state of boldness in the face of what would be fear of the unknown by immersing yourself into it. And you mentioned it's we the people. And if you look at the biblical day back in, we'll say during the times of Romans 13, well, who was running the show there? Well, okay, it was Caesar. Okay. We're in the position of Caesar here in the States. Okay, so the question becomes, how do I serve as Caesar in America? How do I take my rightful place as a fiduciary of the time and the resources that God's given to me? And if the church doesn't take any kind of ground in the political sphere, at least making moves that protect the sanctity of life, protect people's property, their own
Mhm.
person, much like in the animal world, animals will fight violently and to the death over typically three things. They'll fight to protect themselves, their young, and their borders. Those three things right there. you combine that with the right that we have as Americans to not violate our conscience, and like there's a very, very simple bulwark that you have, you can put up behind you, which can really help to guide you very easily through a lot of hard decisions that you have to make. You know, is this going to violate me, my posterity? Is this going to violate my property? Okay, well, if it's going to do any one of those three things, there should probably push against it.
Yeah. Oh, you brought up the animal kingdom. I think we can learn a lot from them sometimes, especially when it comes to another one that I like to think about. I love those three things you mentioned, but the thing that separates us from animals is actually our communication, like our ability to talk. And I brought it before, where if an animal doesn't like what another animal is doing, it can just kill it. But we have reason to actually discuss what's going on. And that's what's going on in Congress, in the halls of our legislation. They're deciding these things where, we don't just kill someone because we are mad at them, but we have a dialogue. We have a judicial system that allows you to have your day in court and to hear those things out. And so, yeah, we are different than animals because we can actually reason together, as the Bible talks about.
Mm-hmm. And how crazy is it too when you have people that will denigrate the Bible and they'll champion a cause like abolish all slavery without wrapping their head around the fact that it's because of Judeo-Christian values that were inborn in this nation when we became a nation separated from Great Britain that made it so that slavery should have been done away with. How crazy is it to think that they're denigrating the book given to us by God that makes it so that they're no longer slaves in an unjust system, but yet they hate that God. Like there's this weird disconnect there. You don't get to have your cake and eat it too. But that's the cost of people not knowing their history, the cost of them not knowing their Bible. So what would you say, beyond merely just jumping into the word and beyond perking your ears up when you hear of certain goings on inside your community, what would you say is a great way to combat what is frankly laziness within the church with regards to caring about the political future of America?
Man, laziness in the church. Is there such a thing? Yeah, unfortunately, it does exist. Okay, so, well, we talked about duty earlier. I think that definitely a restoration of duty and obligation in churches is important. And let me see. I guess the hypocrisy in not using your voice that's why I believe Christianity has become a husk of its former self. If we are, let's take, for example, I mean, if our message is that, like John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only son, he loves you that much that he would do that. But we don't have enough to say, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't like kill babies in the womb and let crime go unpunished and like bankrupt your grandchildren. The hypocrisy in that is that we are siloing the Bible to just one area. And I think that laziness becomes a part of our mindset because we don't actually like apply it to our day-to-day lives as much. We think of it as just this in the box kind of like something that you go to visit. But when you think about how when you take on the name of Jesus and you are ambassador of that, it informs everything that you do in your life. It is not compartmentalized to any specific thing. And so when we come into contact with issues or problems of the day, then we can combat that by making the decisions that align with the Word of God, but also taking like bold decisions and not just going for whatever's easy in the culture and just kind of becoming comfortable in that. What would you have to add to that?
Well, it's what I know has worked for myself, and this comes from, I guess, a desire to put to death the old me. I recently actually did my testimony on my channel here, and a lot of what really drove me forward was I had a lot of and have a lot of natural ability in a lot of different areas. And when nobody's telling you no, especially if you're an actor, you're heavily involved inside the entertainment scene, you tend to see just how far can I push things, like what can I get away with, and you tend to live a little bit harder than a lot of people. So I ended up in, I guess, the street smart area of life, ended up growing up very, very quickly in street smarts as a result of that. But I had a biblical foundation, having grown up in the church for like my entire childhood up till about like when I was 22ish, when I stopped really attending with any kind of regularity. But at age 14, I had really kind of let the world in at that point. And yes, I still went to service, but I wasn't participating with my whole heart, as it were. So I had this biblical foundation, but now I really was taking my cues from the world. And what I found when I was completely flat on my face throughout the whole thing, and I was literally reaching up to touch rock bottom. I had $1.25 to my name. My car had been totaled. I crashed my roommate's car on the way back from the job that I was working at. I didn't know his ABS system was broken, and it was raining, and somebody slammed on their brakes like 70 yards in front of me. So I just kind of tapped the brakes, both locked up instantly, and I slid for that 70-yard distance at 20 miles an hour, just going, no, 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 as I got closer and closer to smacking that car. I had 2 relatives die in the same month there. I was homeless for a week and a half, and then like all in a matter of this took place all in a 3-week span. Ended up getting a job, finding a new place to live. I got out of a terrible relationship, and after that, I realized, wow, I am so parched. I am so parched, and I am so dry because I haven't had any, we'll call it spiritual water pumped into me in so long. And I remember going to work and I didn't know what else to do. So I would bring my Bible with me to work and I would read a little bit during lunch. But during the time I was there, we worked in fabrication at a little place, a little sign shop in Nashville, Tennessee. And so my duties most days was I was sitting there sanding plexiglass, or I was applying Romark applique. It's those raised letters on the signs that you see when you go into a hotel or into a hospital. And I would put on Christian music, but I sat there and I listened to 2 songs, He Reigns by the Newsboys and My Glorious by Delirious. And I would put those on repeat all day, every day for weeks straight. And I would just sit there and I would just absorb that. And I had this kind of turnkey moment for myself, and that was, I want to become as knowledgeable as possible. I want to learn as much as possible. I want to learn about those things that scare me. And so, part of my remedy would be for people that they do have a fear of that unknown. They do have an aversion to, say, politics in general. They have an aversion to talking about it. They have an aversion to even trying to learn about it. Is you have to swallow that fear down, because if in my weakness he is made strong, and if I'm not given a spirit of fear, then I have to act with a strength. I have to make his strength my strength, and I have to grapple with those things that are going to be unsettling. But you do so in a bite-size by bite-size kind of taking into the information until you can finally stomach more. And it's sort of like you're flexing muscles at that point. You're taking in a bit of information that, as Jordan Peterson would describe, looking at a pile of bills. Okay, you pick up maybe one piece of paper, you look at it for 2 minutes, and maybe you put it down. You come back the next day, and maybe it's 5 minutes. Okay, I got to deal with three or four of these, and then maybe next day it's 10 minutes, and then it's 20 minutes, and then it's 30, and finally you're through the stack. That same kind of thing. Apply it to your taking in new information, because the change doesn't have to happen all at once. If somebody out there is wanting genuinely to improve their life and the lives of those around them, which is the very nature of being a Christian, is what we saw in Acts 2, when the church comes into prominence. Well, what were they doing? They were selling possessions, giving their money to the needy. They were breaking bread together. They had all things in common, the Bible says. And through the leadership of the apostles and the miracles and the signs that were being performed, it says that God was adding to their numbers daily. But it requires them to, even if they are fear, show boldness in the face of that fear. So that'd be my recommendation is, look, You just got to jump in with both feet and start slow to begin with. If you're confused on an issue, thank God YouTube exists, because you can find the rabbit hole for everything on YouTube, which is where this video is being broadcast, by the way.
Oh.
And if you want to know more about the politics that you're confused about, well, I would, first of all, I might talk to some of your friends, because guarantee you're going to have one or 12 of them that are pretty well plugged in, and they can tell you, oh yeah, I might stay away from this person. I might look at this person's content here, and here's a great little synopsis of what you need to know.
Mm.
But approach it with an open mind, while always overlaying the Bible over what you're hearing. If somebody's telling you to do something or telling you to act on something that violates God's principles and laws, obviously you don't do that. And if you use that as a metric, then you can sift through all the crap very, very quickly. And before long, you become so thirsty and hungry for the knowledge and information that you can't stop yourself. And you find yourself learning at a much more rapid pace than you ever would. Like throughout my entirety of all my schooling, which, I mean, like for the average person, if you end up going to college, you start like actually doing like classroom work at about age 6. And most of us graduate like around age 22, 23, somewhere thereabouts. So you've got, call it like, what is that? 17 years of schooling that you go through. Man, I did more learning in 3 years after getting my life back together, after getting myself back in church, after deciding that I was tired of living this godless existence. I did more learning in 3 years than I did throughout the entirety of that 17 years of schooling that I spent all the way from grade school into my college years. But it takes a hunger and it takes a willfulness to go there. And it doesn't have to be all at once. Do incrementally better, one day at a time. Even if it's just 1% in 6 months, holy crap, how far you've come.
Yeah, I mean, we live in the age of information. I mean, it's like we have everything that we need at our fingertips.
We have no
And yet-
excuse not to use it. No excuse
Exactly.
not to use it.
No excuse. And committing to being a lifelong learner is one of the best things that you can do, to always have curiosity, to listen to long form podcasts and to get into rabbit trails of little things. And it grows your mind. It allows you to be informed. And an informed citizenry is exactly what a big government does not want. They want you to believe a certain thing and to bend you in a certain way that when these things come true, you're like, oh yeah, big government, that sounds great. You'll just take care of me and it'll be great. And of course, because you have it all figured out and you know better than me, you can protect me from myself and all those sorts of things. And it goes back to being that moral person that you can actually think for yourself and think independently of what the decisions that you're going to make, instead of having to rely on someone else. And then actually be able to think critically about, oh, I wonder like what someone has to say about that. Let me ask them a question to find out. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. And I love being asked questions about the Bible specifically. Like I love teaching it. And specifically when somebody who I know is not of the Christian fold asks me a question about the Bible. What do you think about gay marriage? Or what do you think about slavery? I like to ask them back in response, do you want to have a fight? Or do you genuinely want to know? Because I'm not interested in fighting. And then I will wait for their response. And sometimes they're like, well, I kind of have a bone to pick. I'm like, cool. Well, I really don't want to get into it. Or they say, no, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this here. And I do like we're instructed in 1 Peter, where it's to be prepared to give a reason to anyone who asks you for the hope that is in you, and do so with all meekness and gentleness, knowing that those who revile the word of God will be put to shame. So I know that, and you know that information is power, and that knowledge on a subject is going to be power. It's going to take people sort of lighting their own fires. I know Bear Grylls, one of his quotes is, nobody does it for you. And in this life, you have to get good at lighting your own fires. So I don't know how familiar you are with a pastor. His name is Mark Driscoll. Have you ever heard of him?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Love me some Pastor Mark Driscoll. He's been doing a series as of late on how to vote like Jesus. And man, is it good. He did a recent talk I think it was live either yesterday or the day before, and there was a lot of significant moments inside there, and it was kind of an indictment on the squishy pastors out there, what they called Big Eva or
Ooh.
evangelism. And I've been really enjoying his approach to discussing biblical citizenship and what your role as a Christian is and how you keep evil in check. So I know what his recipe for how to vote like Jesus is, but I'd love to know what is your recipe? How does somebody vote like Jesus?
Wow. Um, well, so when I think of this, I mean, obviously there's different ways of going at this. One of the first ones I think of is, well, you're not voting for, well, you are voting for a candidate, obviously, but you're also voting for not just that man, specifically in the president, because that's the one that we think of the first. Let's just be honest. We think about this, we think, okay, who am I voting for in the president's election? And you have to think about all the things that coincide with that decision. And one of them is, I think this is really important and maybe not talked about nearly enough, is the fact that you're not just voting for that man, you're voting for the 5,000 men that person is going to pick to be held in these positions, because we have so many of them. But I mean, you think of things like the Supreme Court and how vital those decisions are, but also all of the other departments and the agencies that are decided in there. That's part of it. And then also, um, I think platform is definitely important. Like, you can very clearly see, especially nowadays. I mean, the contrast could not be clearer on
Mm,
the platforms, and those are very easy to understand. What is it that God has in these platforms that are true and not true? Like, what is it when you bring the Bible into that? How does that form that? I think of okay, in Proverbs, I wanted to read Proverbs,
mhm.
uh, Proverbs 6. It says that there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 things that he detests: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that kill the innocent, a heart that plots evil, feet that race to do wrong, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who sows discord. So, I mean, you could take even just those few words, wisdom from Proverbs, right? And think about, okay, how do I apply this to this decision? And I think that the Lord will come into that, and He will allow you to give you wisdom on that. But I mean, it comes down to what is this chess move that I can make to better society around me. Uh, it's not going to happen all at once. Politics is the art of the possible. It's not you're not electing someone to be the chairman of your life, or even a pastor, or even an elder. We don't use the same standards. But what is this chess move? How can I make this move strategically to better society and culture around me? And I think the beautiful thing about this election, and it hasn't I oh man, it hasn't happened in, I think, since like 1940, where, and you can fact check me on that, but where you have two candidates. Well, I guess I can't say this anymore because uh, our current president is not rerunning, but we have two. Well, I guess we do still have two candidates basically that were running back to back, and so we have 4 years under one president and 4 years under another, and so you can see that contrast lived out. You don't have to guess how they're going to act. We can know based on the decisions that they've made, and I think that's the strongest argument for how we can know how Jesus would vote.
Mm, that's good. I like that. I like that a lot. You mentioned the platforms that the contenders, if you will, they run on. A lot of people do not bother to go onto their websites, which are public for anybody to see, and actually read through the platforms that these candidates are running on. Because if
Public
they did,
information.
oh my gosh, and if they
Yeah.
did, it would be, especially if you're a Christian, it would be so easy to know, I don't want to vote for this person, or I want to vote
Yeah.
for that person there. So easy. But what does it oftentimes end up boiling down to? I like his hair, or she's got a great smile, or you know what? He was in the military, so he's got my vote. It comes down to sort of this emotional response. And it for no reason do you see politicians or would-be candidates, would-be politicians out there glad handing, kissing babies, posing for photos, because they're trying to be building themselves up within the public eye. And what these people see, oh yeah, that's the kind of guy I'd sit down and have a beer with. The champagne of beers, like freaking Colbert and Kamala the other night. Wow, so she can read a can. But so many people, for them, it becomes that. Oh wow, they seem like a personable guy. I don't know if you've ever watched the kids show Bluey. I've seen probably all the seasons like 4 times now because I have a 3-year-old and he loves Bluey.
Well done.
But, yeah, actually, it's a darn good show. But there's an episode inside there where they're going to vote, and as they're walking into the voting hall, the mom and dad, Bandit and Chili, they're walking with the kids, and there's all these signs for different candidates that are running for whatever the position is, all these different faces. And one of them says, "Who are all these people?" And they say, "Oh, well, they're people that are running for the position that we're voting for." And they're like, "Well, what are we going to vote for?" "Well, we're going to go decide who gets to make some of the rules, or who gets to make the rules, who gets to lead the people." And one of them goes, "Oh, vote for her. She has a nice face." And they have to explain to her, "Look, that's not how it works. You don't just want to vote for somebody because they have a nice face or they got a great smile, or they look awesome in the back nine and their putting game is really strong. You don't want to vote for them just on that.
Yeah.
Get into the nitty gritty of what they want to actually do, what their platform is that they're running on, and see, okay, if I'm a Christian and I'm going to go and vote for somebody that has made seemingly the biggest ticket issue that they're running on, the allowance and the perpetuation of killing the unborn, then that is a massive conflict that you have, not just with what your own character should be, but with your creator himself, who has told us over and over in scripture not to kill infants, not to pass your children into the fire, which is something that even the pagan nations around, a lot of them were not doing because they saw the utility in mass numbers when it came to battle time and wars. But it has to give people a reason for pause. So please, folks, if you haven't yet, get on there and read what the actual platforms are, and it might help you make a better informed decision if you're still on the fence over whether you want to champion, well, I know a lot of people say lesser of two evils, but whether you want to champion light or dark.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point because a lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm not going to vote because of lesser of two evils," or that it's not the perfect candidate or whatever. Well, obviously, unless Jesus is on the ballot, there's never going to be the perfect candidate. I mean, that's just an easy. We can just call that out of the air. The other one is like you have to think practically about. Okay, just rationally. Obviously, this is a decision. It's pretty binary. Like you have one of two options basically, and you think about. I've heard Ben Carson make this point, so I'm stealing this line from him, but I think it's very well put. Where if you have someone that's doing brain surgery on you, do you want someone who's super competent but who doesn't have good side bed manners, or do you want someone who has very good bedside manners but has a reputation of just being a little shaky at times? You look at those things, you look at the policies of who of those the decisions that when they were given the opportunity, where did ink hit the pen or hit the paper? Sorry, and where did that actually change? Where does those decisions come into place? And so people will get hooked up on someone's personality, and those are less important than when you have someone who is protecting something. When I need a bodyguard who is protecting me, I don't care so much about his his attitude or his demeanor as much as I care about what is he going to do when conflict happens, when there are seconds to make a decision. How is he going to act? Is he going to act on truth, on righteousness, on wisdom, or is he going to act in his own interest, or do what's politically correct, or what will get him reelected? But when you make those decisions to stand for what is true, what is right, and regardless of the consequences, I believe that God will bless that. And we have a decision beyond just, okay, I don't like this personality. I don't like these little things, or people use the mean tweet slogan. But we have to think about what are the policies that are going to affect my life, and how does that contrast with the other candidate?
Mm. Truth is so important there, and you have to hunt it at all costs. Jordan Peterson, he talks in a significant number of his lectures and his interviews about when you speak something untruthful, and not just something untruthful, but something that you've heard somebody else say, and you adopt the words as though they're your own without actually having done any digging into those words to see if there's any validity behind them, to see if they actually are true. And he talked about how you know mentally, you know immediately when you're trying to use your speech instrumentally versus actually being meaningful and measured with what you say, speaking surgically, as it were, you know instantly. And a lot of us will try and ignore it. The book, I think Second Timothy points out that if you rest on a laurel long enough, eventually your conscience can become seared. And what happens?
Yeah.
The Bible describes the Lord as giving you over to a reprobate mind. Like that can actually happen because you've essentially made it known within your own soul and your own heart of hearts that that's the way you want to play things dishonestly. But you have to hunt truth at all costs, and the price you pay for pursuing truth at all costs is it's going to be painful, especially if you're one that has not bothered to fact check. You're one that does like so many people used to do. Oh yeah, did you know why Mr. Rogers always wore sweaters? Oh, it's because he had long full arm tattoos from his time in the war. No, not true whatsoever. I'm pretty darn sure he never even served. But that was one of those things that people were just like, oh yeah, that's why he always wore sweaters. And then before a weekend was over, everybody was saying that. I watched an entire expose on him on mental floss that actually went through all the facts. And like, yeah, no, he never was a sniper, didn't serve in the military in that capacity, didn't have tattoos. It was just kind of his thing. But
So you know the stuff.
yeah, but like to that end, the nature of truth and a lie. Well, what is a lie? A lie is malleable. A lie can fit any mold you want to put it into. A lie can endure pressure because you can squish it to fill in every single gap and void for whatever situation. The truth, by contrast, is rigid. It is inflexible, and if you try
Offensive.
and push it, yeah, it's offensive. And if you try and push it, it's going to cut you. But it's sort of like Negan says to Rick in I think it's season 6 of Walking Dead. He says, "Oh, it's a bitter pill to swallow, but swallow it you must." And you have to stifle the initial fear response that you have and say, "All right, well, I'm going to educate myself in the things that I don't know." And instead of just parroting somebody's talking points, and whether you're sucking down 6 or 7 hours of CNN every day or 6 and 7 hours of Fox, instead of just parroting those top little highlights that you're seeing for a 24-hour cycle, why don't you do like the Bereans in Acts 17:11 and actually search these things out yourselves to see if what you've been told is indeed so? Because like
Yeah.
us as Christians, that's a huge thing that we're tasked with, and that's why the Berean Jews were considered to be more noble than those in Thessalonica, because they received the scripture with all eagerness and presence of mind, but they still searched it out, and they're like, I'm not going to believe anything this Paul guy says until I've checked it out here. Like, it sounds good, but still, I am approaching the word with a hefty amount of skepticism, which you need to do.
Yes. But just asking simple questions about what's going on around you and looking for truths, it generally, like, you can access so much. You can see where these things happen, you can read about them, you can watch documentaries and YouTube videos and articles on them and get really ingrained about it as much as you want, and I would encourage you to do that. The question I have for you, Eric, to flip the script,
Yeah.
is do you think that, because I know you study a lot of the Old Testament, so I'm curious to know what you think on this. Do you think mankind wants to be free?
Mm, no, I don't, but I do at the same time. So I do think mankind wants to be free in the sense of expression. Mankind wants to be free to express themselves however they feel like they want to. And at the same time, though, we crave rules. We crave a structure with which we can live inside of, because you look at the Israelites in Deuteronomy when they're having the law read back out to them, and Moses is reading the laws that were given to them in Leviticus, and even just the first time they got the laws, what did it say happened? It said that they wept. They wept for joy at having the law, because now it was not just unfettered freedom and the right to expression, which they did want freedom and they did want expression, but now it was, oh my gosh, now we know where the lines are. Now we know what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And like up to that point, for them, it was everything's a green light. We don't know how far is too far, save for that morality that's written on the inside of their hearts. But when it was finally there in black and white to see, then it finally meant something. And they were like, awesome. This is what we have that gets to stand out here, not just for us, but for all of society. These are the things we get to measure our actions against. So I think that everybody out there has built into them a desire to serve somebody. It might be the devil, it might be the Lord, but people do crave something over them. And like, whether they mean to or not, you have influencers out there talking about my tribe, and it's just the people that are in their chats and their DMs for their daily shows or their weekly shows. And these people, they take their cues from this person. Like Oprah, for the longest time, she controlled the reading patterns of millions of women across the nation when she would have the author come on and talk about this book here. And people, they want to be told what to do. So again, to reiterate, with regards to expression and with regards to the ability to be free, yes, people, with the regards to expression and the right to use what's at their disposal to express themselves, people want freedom. But with regards to how they're going to live their lives, and for whatever twisted reason, how they're going to handle their money, people do not want to be free. They want to be told what to do.
Be taken care of.
And you have to yoke yourself in some capacity. You have to. That's why Jesus Christ even says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And the analogy that he's drawing on there is yoking a pair of oxen together. It's like, okay, well, how do you go about breaking in a new ox? Typically, you take the younger ox and you're going to yoke it to an older, much stronger ox. And when the younger one starts to fall behind, the older one, marching at his own pace, is going to pull him up to where he needs to be. If the younger one is like, yeah, I've got this, and he tries to forge ahead, the older one will pull him back to the pace he needs to be at and will march with him. And that ox realizes, oh my gosh, having an authority over me here and having this yoke on me here is actually more beneficial for me in being able to walk in lockstep with my creator, or one who I would revere more highly than myself, than not having that yoke present. So yeah, I don't think people actually they want to be free in that expressive sense, but they want to be told what to do.
Very good. I agree. And what I think is interesting about that, and what made me think of that, is that like freedom is a value that has to be taught. It doesn't come like innate.
Man.
And you mentioned the Israelites, and it made me think of the Israelites after they leave Egypt, right? And you have this contrast of slavery and bondage, where literally their children are being thrown into the Nile, and they have all of these conflicts coming up against them, and they're in slavery. And God does all of these miracles, delivers them, and parts the sea, and is like blowing quail off course and providing for every need. But they're like, yeah, we want to go back because we want meat and cucumbers. And like, it's like, so they want to go back to slavery to be taken care of. And I think it goes to this larger point of that this is a value that has to be taught. It doesn't come innate with us. Like, we want to be taken care of, like you said. And so that was a very, very good answer. I know I put you on the spot with that, but that was very well said. I like that.
It was because it's true. It really is true. And for a lot of people, this is what's so crazy out there. A lot of people, the impetus behind their own inaction, it's not just fear, because we know that can be both a motivator or it can be a staller. But for a lot of people, it's fear of making the wrong decision, fear of making the wrong choice. And so they want to be told what to do because, well, if I'm told what to do and I just follow orders and everything goes completely pear-shaped on me, then it wasn't my fault. I was just following orders. I just did what I was told to do. So I'm completely absolved in the negative happenings that have now taken place as a result of me doing what I was told to do. It's somebody else's fault to do that. And that's what so many people have given themselves over to. Like we saw it with all of the 2020 lockdowns. We saw with all the masking, people engaging in activity out of that fear because they wanted somebody else to make the choice for them. That way they couldn't be at fault if they had to think quickly and decide who they were going to serve. The Bible says, Joshua, he says, and I think it's Joshua 8, choose ye this day whom you will serve. Whether it's the gods of your fathers or it's going to be the Lord. And whatever you do, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. But you still have to choose. You got to make the decision. And simply sitting back and taking your cues from people and just acting, like you don't get to look back at soldiers who are now going to be before a Geneva Convention, who are now going up for war crimes for like back in the 40s during World War II, who partook in the mass slaughter of Jewish prisoners, and you don't get to look at them and say, oh, you were just following orders. That's fine. Yeah, totally fine. You were just following orders. You get a pass because clearly you had no thought that went into this. Like, no. People, they want to be told what to do because they don't want to have the onus on them for a mistake. And that's, oh my gosh, that's worse to me than inaction.
Cowardly. Yes, I agree.
That's like tying in a game of soccer. I used to hate that. Like, so I used to play AYSO soccer, and we didn't get to do shootouts in AYSO soccer. And there were several times where I tied. I would have rather just lost the damn game than tie in a game. It was like I have to have a final ending here. Something has to be finite. Something has to determine who has won and who has lost.
Well, I think I really like how you brought out about the consequences of our actions in how you ended there, because maybe think of the Good Samaritan and how there was a conscious decision by people who saw the guy in the ditch but walked past him, and they decided to not get involved, and that was a decision. We think of neutrality as a form of abstaining from something, right? But actually walking past is a decision. Not to vote is to vote, as the saying goes. But when you think of the person who decided to stop and actually care about that, I see that as simple as voting. Like, that is, you're taking time to make that decision, to care, and to just take that first step in deciding to do that. And so when I think of, like, okay, how does that inform our decisions? That is a very simple principle of applying what we've learned and stopping and caring for these little things that are going on. But really, then, if you think about it, okay, if I don't do this, what is going to happen as a consequence of that? And people are going to bleed out and die, as the parable goes.
Isn't that just the crux of it? Because, like, obviously the word consequence itself is a neutral world. You have good consequences, you have bad consequences. And what I fear so much in myself, and this is probably why I have lived the way that I have for so many years, is I fear having to sit back and wonder, what if? That's probably my biggest fear. And it's primarily with regards to a potentially wonderful opportunity that I'm not seizing upon, or that I've put on the back burner. Like, oh, I don't want to sit back for the next 10, 15 years ruminating on it, going, what if I had made that phone call? Or what if I did audition for that gig? Or what if I did apply for that job? Or what if I had gone to that meeting? I don't want to put myself in that position. I want to know. And the consequence for me of not knowing is worse than the knowing. And I don't know if that makes me weird or what, but I feel like if more people's response was thank you. I feel like if more people's response was geared that way, it could save them a lot of heartache, because then they wouldn't be sitting back like the the servant with the one talent going, I put it in the ground and I'm going to sit on it. I'm going to wait because what if I make the wrong decision? It's
Yeah.
that, unfortunately,
Well,
that's unacceptable.
it is. And Jesus talked about who much is given, much is required.
Mm.
Who much is given, much is required. And it made me think of when you said the talents, because we have been given so much that I think we take for granted the blessings that we get to live in. Like, um, we have what I call the prodigal son syndrome, where we are just living in this place of abundance and protection. Like we've virtually we live like kings compared to the majority of the world. And so when we think about, okay, what am I going to eat today? Or what am I, whatever, we don't have to think about these survival things, those are taken care of. So we live in this place of abundance. And so we go out and squander our wealth. And then all of a sudden we're like, wow, I didn't realize that if we don't stand for liberty, that I'm not going to be able to attend church. And I'm going to be like, we're locking up pastors and doing all these crazy things now. And that, like, we're mutilating our kids. And we think that it's great that we have a month to celebrate pride, which is like the root of all evil, right? Like, it's just like, there's, we start to get this cold water of what is going on. My children are coming home and they're asking what my pronouns are, and I can't pay my bills, and like I have like illegal immigrants like walking around, like what's going on, and so we have to return to these principles of, okay, what is the truth and how do I apply that to the decisions that I make? And we can't blame that on others if society goes the direction that we don't like, because we didn't use our opportunity, the easy ballots instead of bullets. I think it
Oh
was
man,
Lincoln that said that, right?
I think it
To make
was.
these decisions.
Man, that's so, oh gosh, that's so on the nose for just the current political climate that we are in. It really, really is. Like we are without excuse as to what is happening in our world when it comes to decisions being made at the ballot box. So I want to shift here a little bit, and I'd love to get into some of the tactics that you use personally with how you go about presenting political arguments, whether it be like at a campus, at a speaking engagement. I know that you have done some work and you are currently doing some work with Turning Point USA. I'd love to get into some of that there. But I want to give some people like some tools for their arsenal that they can use, that they can whip out this Thanksgiving after the election. Thank God is over, and when they're trying to quell down possible hostility between dishes. Um, but what are some tactics that you would employ personally or have employed personally in bridging a gap conversationally with somebody to address certain political issues that are meaningful to you?
That's good. Well, the first thing I try to do whenever I approach a conversation is I think, okay, and I often tell this to people, how can I get clarity over agreement? I would much rather have clarity on where we each stand. And so if they say something that I disagree with, I just like to reiterate that, okay, so you believe that if we don't have a border, that we can just be one world and it's going to be great. Okay, thank you. I have understanding where you're at now. I don't agree with that, but now we have clarity. And so you don't have to approach every conversation that you have to change that person right then and there if you come up against something that you don't understand or disagree with. But then I also think it's then being able to know what you believe and why you believe it, and being
Mm.
able to defend that. The Bible is very clear about always being able to give a defense, and you and believe, and like not. And for me, I think of First Timothy 4, to set an example in speech and in your conduct and what you love and your faith and in your purity. And so I try to take all of those principles and apply them to conversations. I love getting into conversations. As you mentioned, I'm involved with Turning Point USA. It's the nation's largest youth activism organization promoting America First principles and liberty, freedom, and many other things. But Turning Point does an amazing job of creating spaces for those conversations to happen. And what I love about it is a way that you can get involved if you're interested. You should definitely check out turningpointusa.com. And there is so many resources that they have available. They are the battleship that will save America, because they take all of these principles and they apply them and they give you resources to do that. So that's another amazing way that I love to, whether it's tabling or going to events. It's an amazing organization that you should definitely check out.
That's great. Yeah, I've watched a number of clip videos of Charlie Kirk being on campuses and just taking one at a time, student after student,
Mm,
asking him questions, or they have a gripe about something that he has said. And the approach that you described there of I want to reach clarity first and foremost on what your stance is. So, and then provide clarity to you on where my stance is. Man, that is so pertinent, and that really has to be first and foremost, because what ends up happening most times is you get somebody that starts off maybe from the best of intentional places, and they get into the argument or the discussion. They're like, I do want to have an amicable resolve here, but let's start on this topic. Maybe it's infanticide, which masquerades as abortion or what have you. And they say, hey, let's talk about this. But then very quickly, once their first point has been obliterated by truth, instead of trying to argue the facts, they just resort to ad hominem attacks. And it
mhm.
just descends into, well, I'm just going to repeat the same thing that I've said that's already been completely destroyed, louder and louder and louder and louder, as though somehow increasing in volume makes it that I am winning the argument. So I really like the establishing of, all right, let's get clarity first here. And I understand that passion plays into this too, but we have to filter our passion through facts. Too many people, they
Yeah,
like
because
to do the opposite.
exactly, and people that are willing to have this conversation often have like predetermined decisions, or they know what their what their opinions are. So coming at it from that aspect allows it to be a little bit disarming and really get to the heart of the issue. Okay, what do we do? Let's find some common ground, and can we agree on this? And can we come to this understanding? And then it at least allows them to think critically instead of just looking for someone to have a debate with. And like, what are your intentions with this conversation, and then be able to have a formative discussion with some actually like intellectual dialogue.
Very good. So this current election we have coming up here, we got President Trump, we have Vice President Kamala on the ticket. What would you say are the three top reasons that you would say would make you vote for one candidate in particular? And what are three top reasons that would make you not vote for the other candidate?
Oh wow. Um, well, okay, so look at President Trump again. You can look at his record and what he has done for our country, and I think of I mean, you can take any issue. For me, abortion is, and I'm a like one issue voter, if you want to call it that, where this is one of the most important things. Where overturning Roe versus Wade can be point back to the decisions that were made to put on certain Supreme Court justices. And so you look at decisions like that. For me, that is a very foundational. But then you look at just our country in general, and even the world. There was much more peace and order under Donald Trump than we have in this current regime. And so for me, when I look at how does that translate into even local decisions and economic factors, that is a huge one where we had more prosperity and order than we do now. And for Kamala Harris, I think there's multiple things. Obviously, there is a denigration of everything that points to God.
Mm,
There is a perpetuation of the trans issue, of things that are just completely adverse to what the Bible talks about as being that we are made in the image of God, that we should be protecting sanctity of life. And for me, that is again like the complete contrast of promoting evil, of promoting things that just go against the laws of nature. And to me, that is obviously contradicts everything that we believe in as Christians. And um, just yeah, the the contrast between the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years, and the previous 4 years, I think is enough to show the the ways in these philosophies, and when they're actually worked out, what is the result.
mm, that's good. I like that. Sort of a little synoptic view of some, as you said, very pertinent things that maybe it's not the entire platform, but those
Yeah.
you can very easily find yourself a single issue voter. And I know for myself in this case, I find myself as one as well. It doesn't mean that you like every single thing the person's going to do, but you have to do like the cartoon cats and Tom and Jerry, and you swallow the fish and you pull out the bones.
Yes. That's right.
Um,
Yes, I agree.
so another one for you then. We're specifically with working with Turning Point USA. What have you seen at some of the events that you've been in where there has been very much, we'll say, a clear divide, whether it comes down to seating arrangements or whether it comes down to the crowd itself? What has been some of the response that you have seen on campuses where you've seen not just students engage with what's being presented to them, but engaging with each other? Have you seen a lot of fighting? Have you seen any amicable resolves? What's it been like?
Well, there is a tremendous growth of young people and students looking for truth and places to have these conversations. Turning Point USA is known for running out of space. Like their
Wow, that's
events
awesome.
pack out and they sell out. And I think it is because they speak the truth. I mean, Charlie, it's a full-time job just speaking the truth, and he's not afraid to go into those hard places and bring that. So students are thirsty for that. They don't they want to be able to understand these topics, and I think there is becoming a larger portion of the population that has an appetite for that. So Turning Point USA, like they do a really good job at that. And when it comes to these conversations, like we live in a culture that's so feminized that we can't even have deep conversations about things because all of a sudden it's like toxic masculinity
Mhm.
because like you can't offend somebody or something. But no, that's not how we were. That's not what freedom of speech is. That's not what our dialogue and our intellect leads to. We are able to have meaningful conversations and disagree at times, yes, and have heated conversations, but prove your point. And then if the evidence stands, then you have something to I guess be known for. But one of the things I love about if you watch any of like the campus tours, which are going on right now, um, whenever they do Q&A, they always have Q&A, and if you disagree, you go to the front of the line. And so inviting those conversations is really engaging, and it's really I think it's very impactful for students to say, "Wow, I have this opportunity to make my case and to have a conversation around it and actually be able to see what comes of it."
I really like that. Actually, it brings back the concept and form and function of the town square, where you get to go and present your ideas. I forget where it is in the UK. I believe it's in London. There is a park that there are a bunch of ladders staged, and people get together and they just engage and grapple with ideas. And if you're going to present an idea, you have to climb to the top of the ladder or the top of the pedestal, and you present what it is that you have been thinking about or whatever it is you're holding so dear, and you present this thing like your baby, to just be hacked to pieces by those that are there who are also trying to, I don't want to say voice their opinion, but they're also trying to give a voice to their opinion. And you get to
Hmm.
see, does my idea hold weight? Can it hold water at all? Or are there holes in this boat? So I really, really love that. I love giving people the opportunity to see in real time and to have to form an idea in real time. That's another thing that I really enjoy,
Yeah.
specifically watching speakers like Jordan Peterson. I enjoy listening to Michael Knowles when he's spoken at some of YAF's setups that they've done as well.
Hmm.
Ben Shapiro is another one that I enjoy hearing when he gives his lectures. But I really like the way that Jordan will allow himself to verbally process and will allow himself to happen upon new ideas while presenting.
Yeah.
Because if we aren't of a mind to be able to allow our minds to be changed, if we only go into conversations with preconceived notions or preconceived understanding of how we want things to be, with an absolute refusal of allowing anything in that would be even beneficial to ourselves, then like, you can't make any kind of headway. It's like the person who they think that, well, okay, just to save face in this argument, I'm just going to double down and keep saying the same thing over and over and over. All the while in the back of their head, there's this niggling thing that keeps pricking and going, This is already done and over. What are you doing? You got to cut
Run.
this madness out. You need to flee from this situation. That's
Yeah.
that's awesome. That really is. I love it. I wish there was more of that at the campus that I attended. I didn't get to see a whole lot of that at NAU, which is where I studied in DeKalb, Illinois. I did go to a lecture actually, and I ended up. I think I can't remember if I left the lecture early. I might have stayed to the end. Um, there was a feminist, I forget what her name was. She came and she was sharing some thoughts and opinions about how she felt the world should work at our school. And I remember sitting there the entire time listening to these ideas and concepts that she was giving to us. And none of it had been filtered through that lens of truth. It was all purely from an emotional place. And she was treating emotions as though those are the most real things in the world.
Right.
And emotions, while they are real, they're very often not the truth. That's why the Bible tells us that our hearts are desperately sick and evil. Who can know them? Because you can have in a moment when your adrenaline spikes up, you can have this emotional response that tells you something bad is happening when everything around you could just be totally fine.
Yes.
So what would somebody do? I know that you're a chapter is it president of Turning
President.
Point?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what would somebody do if they wanted to actually become a chapter president for Turning Point USA? What's the process they have to go through for that?
Yeah, it's super easy. Just go to turningpointusa.com and you can join the movement there. And you'll get connected with a local field rep who will be a resource for you in anything that you want to do. You can host events, bring speakers to campus or your local school or town, and they give you free kits, lots of resources that you can do. And then, of course, they bring you out to training like chapter leadership summits where you actually get to interact with these people that you follow and get trained and taught about how to sharpen your skills, your understanding, your knowledge of these topics. But I think more importantly, you get to see that you're not alone. And that is often what is so vital in being able to bring truth to these places is that people feel like they're alone, they're isolated, and they're not willing. They self-censor really, and they
Oh,
just
yep.
mute themselves. And so, being involved in Turning Point is also you can kind of have that selfish reason of like I want to get to know people and other people, like-minded people. I've been going to Turning Point events for years, and I have friends all around the country now that I get to interact and we visit when we get to events together and we get to pick up where we left off because we have similar passions about this country, but we're also the same generation. We can relate to what's going on in the world. So you get that camaraderie, that friendship at Turning Point when you join. And I would encourage you to do that. And I would also add they have Turning Point Faith, which is what I'm most passionate about because it specifically is for Christians and believers who want to be equipped with the truth. And so they have a whole host of resources. You can look at scorecards for local voter cards on like how to make your decision and who to vote for. And they have all kinds of courses, trainings, immense amount of resources there. So you can go to tpusafaith.com and check that out. That is what I'm most passionate about.
That sounds like it's right up my alley too, because first and foremost, I'm a teacher, if nothing else, and I love explaining things to people in a way that makes sense. That's why I'm doing this whole podcast here. But it's fun to grapple with ideas that are unsettling. It's fun to traverse those untraveled waters because I mean, shoot, it might be Leviathan down there, or it could be bluegills. Who knows? You won't know until you take the boat out. So, do you have any events that are going to be coming up that you're going to be a part of?
Right now, we've been focused on the election, so just helping get people registered to vote. And you can go to tpaction.com/vote. If you're not registered, you have very limited days left to do that. And so that is coming up fast. So we've been focused on that. We don't have any events scheduled at this time, but we are always planning things and looking to organize.
That's great. That's really great. So we got a few more minutes here. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm very, very, very honored that you decided to join me tonight. So you did a great talk at the building firm sessions that we had a few weeks back. And I I asked a question there that I want to pose to you again and see what your
Okay.
response is. And my question was, do you think that our nation is due for a judgment? And if so, do you think that our nation is due for judgment in the corporate sense, that all of us are going to have to endure a judgment? Or do you think there will be those of us that are spared said judgment? And I pointed to Rahab in the Battle of Jericho for helping the two spies escape and then hiding the fact that they had been there and where they had went. And she hit them up on the roof and she saved the lives of these two men. For doing that act, she was included in the lineage of Jesus Christ. And when they came in to destroy what was left of the city after the walls came a tumbling down, her and all those under her roof were spared. So we saw a judgment for the bulk, and then there's Rahab peeking up out of the rubble, absolved from it all, essentially. Given the many sordid sins that our nation has amassed in infanticide alone with abortions, but also our tolerance of evil in the forms of, like, we have the here in New York, criminals, they get out essentially the next day. We have bail reform here, which makes it so you have violent offenders. They can keep repeating and repeating and repeating. They're right back out on the streets. I mentioned the concept of possibly being under a brass heaven or a brazen heaven, and that's where so much sin has occurred. And I'm largely thinking of the sin of infanticide, that it's as though even our prayers aren't reaching our Creator's ears. Uh, I do maintain that if we ever stop our support of Israel, judgment is for sure coming. I think it's probably one of the few bulwarks in front of us. Um, and I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, "I tremble when I think of how my Creator is just, but His justice will not sleep." And to quote Billy Graham's wife, she was famous for saying, "If God doesn't punish America, He's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah." So I pose a question again to you: do you think that America is due for a corporate punishment, or do you think that those of us who are trying to affect positive change and trying to speak truthfully and live truthfully will be able to sort of circumvent it?
Mm. Well, it's a great question, and I know you're very well. You know this stuff very well. So, for me, when I approach this question, it's always about what is my response to the answer. And so, if I'm looking for a way out of responsibility, then it's coming at it from, I believe, a weak understanding of what our duty is as Christians. And
Mm.
so, we get into the eschatology of, when Christ is going to return and like all these things. um, yeah, I don't know the time, I don't know the dates, all that kind of stuff. So it's that, that's foreign to me. I'm not on the planning committee. I'm on the welcoming committee, as you heard me say.
My
I
kazoo
think
is
that's the
ready.
easiest way. Yes. So I'm ready to welcome him, but I want to be caught doing what he has called me to do, and I don't believe that that fear is an excuse for inaction, no matter what's going on. And so, yeah, when we talk about judgment, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I believe that we should be on our knees asking for mercy for our land when it comes to the injustices that we have allowed and the evil that is perpetuated because of the laws that are now on our books. And so for me, yeah, it's hard to understand how a merciful God can allow something like that to happen. And I don't believe I have maybe all the theological answers to that. But when it comes to my here and now and my life and the decisions when I stand before the creator of the universe, and he is looking over it says that he will, every word will be known and he will judge those. I want to be caught doing what he has called me to do, regardless of the circumstances.
Mm.
And I think when I answered that question back at the conference, it was kind of that concept of, okay, the house is under judgment. It's on fire. Let's just get the kids out and run for the hills. We have our AK-47s and our food prep all dried up, and we're ready to go. I think that is operating out of fear. I don't think that when God was talking to Joshua about being strong and courageous, there was no asterisk as far as like, But if you allow abortion for 50 years and, this and so, like, there's there's a level of courage that we are called to go into the land, excuse me, and have dominion. And so when we just cower from that, I believe that that is not following what God has called us to do. And when in Micah 6:80 it says that He has shown you, oh man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? That you live justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And so for me, I think that is very clear. We can know the will of God for us, and He is outside of time. He is outside of even like one place. So we can't truly know exactly, what that end result is going to be. But I want to be caught doing what He has called me to do, and live that way in everything that I do. And I would also add, you think of all the examples in the Bible where judgment was called upon for a nation, and there was times that God acted on that, and there's a lot more that you get into that. But when I think of like Jonah, for example, Jonah is an amazing example of how God wanted to save a nation, and He took someone who didn't even believe in that, didn't want even to see it happen, and took him off course and brought him in, and there was repentance and revival in the land, and they repented and were made right. And I think that is God's heart for all people. And it's hard for us to understand maybe because God is outside of time. So 10 years or 100 years of something like this going on is like, surely this must be happening, when really it's like, oh yeah, like to God, it's just like a day to us is, or a day to Him is like a thousand years to us, kind of thing. And so I think we have to keep that in mind. But you look all throughout the Old Testament at times where there was judgment, but there were counselors to the kings that stood up and did what was right and prevented mass evils from happening. You think of like Daniel and Esther and Joseph, and even King Josiah did that. He restoring the temples. And so there's always a call on the righteous to stand and live by faith for what we hope for, and trust God with the rest.
Very good. Very good.
So.
Very good. So last little bit I'd like to pick your brain on is what would be your recommendation for people that are maybe just stepping into the political sphere, as it were? Maybe they're Christian, maybe they're not Christian. What would be just your initial recommendation to them? Like where could they get started if they just want to learn more? And the question is kind of twofold. What do you think are the most pertinent things that you would personally like to see take place here in the U.S. to set us on a better path?
Oh, wow. That question. Okay, so if you're just getting started and you're like, man, I want to learn more about just like the principles of America, why we exist, and those sorts of things, the best resource that I could recommend to you is actually Hillsdale College, Hillsdale Online College. They have about 30 free courses that you can take, and they are so good. I've taken about 11 of them, so I'm working on getting through them. But you can pick anything from physics to cultural to economic to religion, any of those sorts of things, the Constitution, and they are such good resources for really getting a hands-on material. I believe they're one of the best in the country, and that would be my first recommendation. Pick one that stands out to you, and it's an amazing resource. So Hillsdale College, that is a great one. I also, you can go to Heritage Foundation. They have some really good information on different like policies that are going on. So if you're like, I don't know what to think about like economics and like the Second Amendment and some of those things, even taxation, they have, or the environment, if you want to get more topic specific, they have some really good stuff there. And then of course, Turning Point USA is really good for networking and getting involved in that way. And there's a whole plethora of options from there. And then your second part of the question was, can you reiterate that?
Yeah. What are some things you would, if that would need to happen like right now? What are the few things that would need to take place right now to put our country as a whole on a better trajectory overall?
Exactly. So for me, what I'm most passionate about is the church filling the space where I believe there's the church speaking the truth in these areas is, I believe, that the only way that we're truly going to be able to see change in the hearts of man. Um, I don't necessarily blame a secular world for making secular decisions.
Mm.
I don't expect them to know all the truth because they don't know the truth and the life. And so when I think about how things can change in the long term, for me, it is having a church that is focused on solving the problems of a community and saying, okay, how do I meet the needs of the people around me and how do I lead them to Jesus? Because their immediate need, they might not realize it. Yes, their greatest need is Jesus Christ to be the center of their world, but they also can't pay for dinner, or they're also struggling with a teenager that is rebellious, things like that. And so showing up in those ways and being involved civically, I think, is where we can be involved more and better than the government can ever be. You think of areas of like adoption, or some of these areas where
Mm.
the church could do so much better than the government, and providing shelter and providing for the hungry and the needy. I mean, that's what Jesus has called us to do in Matthew 25. When I was hungry, you fed me. And what you've done to the least of these, you've done it to me. And so that principle of taking that to our communities as churches and speaking that into our congregations and just giving them the understanding of, okay, this is the proposition that's on our ballot this November. How do we are you informed with the truth on that? Have you got the scriptures to back up that decision? And so I think it could look different for each church, whether it's having a civics pastor or a community organizer or just a segment in the Sunday sermon that talks about, hey, this is what's going on, or this is a principle that that our country was founded on, and this is why it's pulled from the scriptures, and this is where it is in the Bible, and those sorts of things. I think that is the most powerful way where we will get better leaders if the church starts to speak on this, because otherwise, what do we expect a secular world to make good people? What are their morals based on? There's only one that is true, and that is what the church has in the Bible.
That's good. Put another way, a guy isn't a horse thief because he steals a horse. He steals a horse because he's a horse thief. With regards to people in the secular world doing what they do and why they do it, I think that would be a great idea for a lot more pastors to have a segment included inside their services where it's like, hey guys, we're going to talk a little bit about politics right now. I think that'd be so good. I wish more people did that. More Mark Driscolls.
Well, and I would even say you don't even have to use the word politics, because people can often associate that with a lot of things and like a negative emotion. But how does your pastor form your worldview? Think about that question. What type of worldview do you have on these topics? And you don't even, I mean, the stuff that we're debating nowadays is like, okay, what is a woman? And when does life begin? And what do we do with criminals? Like, what does the Bible talk about, like justice? And how is the government like? And so you don't even have to even get political in the fact that, like, we're not talking about like taxes and whether or not we should have like highways and things like that. But we're talking about very practical principles, the laws of nature, the shackles of reality, if you will. And they are principles that are directly rooted in the Bible. So there should be no fear in talking about male and female, and the need to protect children, and the need for economic stability and for peace. Like, all of these things are directly in the Word, and I believe that we can mirror them and speak them to our congregation. And that is all we need to do. And if that offends people, then I believe that we are speaking the truth. And there's obviously a love component to that. We don't need to turn people off. But not speaking that is just as dangerous and will inevitably lead to more injustice.
Very good. Very good. Well, that's going to be time for us tonight, folks. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been Tough Talks with Josiah Martin tonight. Biblical citizenship and why you as a Christian ought to care about politics. All the links that we've talked about, you're going to find in the description box down below. I'll have everything inside there that Josiah was mentioning tonight there. So please, please, please utilize these resources. get into this stuff. It's not for the faint of heart. I'm the first to tell you that. Like there's a little bit of pain involved inside this, but if we wanna be those ones that reign along with Jesus Christ, well, you don't just get to enjoy all the fun parts and skirt the suffering. There's a little bit of suffering involved with it. Not to say this is going to be the most bludgeoningly soul crushing adventure of your life. I think you're going to find much more reward in it than you will tragedy. Josiah, you have the last word tonight, sir. You want to plug anything?
I would just encourage you to think about when you stand before God, are you going to be content with saying, God, I lived an easy life. I avoided any conflict. I didn't offend anybody. And it was a very easy life. I think that would be a very underutilized life when Jesus called us to live a full life. And so I would commend you to dig into that, whatever avenue you find is your vein to get into, just to start and press into that. I think we're called to live a full life, and that we have everything that we need in Jesus, and that he informs every decision we make. So I thank you for this time and just for listening. I think it's really powerful to have these conversations. And as James says, it is a sin to know what to do and not to do it. Or sorry, it is a sin to know what you ought to do, and then if you don't do it, it's a sin. And so I would just commend you to act on that. And I hope that you're blessed by this conversation.
Awesome. There you have it, folks. Have a great rest of your day and an even better weekend. Take care and God bless.
God bless.